Don't forget to subscribe to the channel of Special Stories. We will have videos every day. Do you have a story? Send it to us in the comments below. Leave a like to help the channel. The young nurse, Abigail, worked every day and loved her job. She treated everyone with courtesy and care, which made her well known in the hospital among all the patients. However, this also left her feeling drained because, despite loving her job, she felt the pain of each person who entered there. She always empathized with others, and her kindness made her more generous with the patients, but it also made her suffer when any of them passed away. However, one day something happened that would change her life forever. Abigail was on duty during the early morning at the hospital. The shift was quiet, but suddenly ambulances arrived and the doctors rushed out with a young man and a young woman who were both badly injured and unconscious. As always, Abigail was ready and did everything she could to assist the doctors in saving their lives. Hours passed. Unfortunately, the young man did not survive, but the young woman did, although she remained in a coma, and the doctors said it could last for days or months until she woke up. Shortly after, the families of the two young people arrived at the hospital, and it was a shock for both of them to learn what had happened to their loved ones. Abigail then learned everything that had happened. The two were a couple and had come from a party with some friends. The young man, the boyfriend of the young woman named Naomi, had been drinking and as a result, crashed the car into a pole at high speed. Neither of them was wearing a seatbelt, which resulted in their severe injuries. The young man did not survive and passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. Naomi, the 18-year-old young woman, suffered a head injury and had a traumatic brain injury, which put her in a coma. The young girl's parents were crying for their daughter's condition and praying for her to wake up soon, but only time would tell when or if she would improve. Abigail, like other nurses, started taking care of Naomi as the days passed. Abigail developed a special affection for Naomi, as everyone said she looked like Sleeping Beauty due to her beauty and endless sleep. 90 days had passed and Naomi remained in the same vegetative state, showing no signs of reaction. Despite that, her parents visited her every day and talked to her about all the news, which touched Abigail deeply. She found it beautiful the love they had for their daughter, a tenderness that Abigail had never experienced as she was born in an orphanage and never been adopted. As Abigail continued to work at the hospital, she would go to Naomi's room every day to change her for and provide other medical care. Spending so much time by her side, Abigail felt closer to Naomi, even though she didn't show any response. After a few days, Abigail noticed that Naomi's mother started visiting her daughter alone. When she asked about her husband, the woman became sad and told Abigail that he had passed away a few days ago. Abigail felt the mother's pain and realized that she was going through a very difficult phase in her life due to the loss of her husband and the condition of her daughter. Time passed again, and it had been 4 months since the accident. Naomi's mother was still there as always, but this time she seemed especially sad as it was Naomi's birthday. Her mother wanted to celebrate and give her daughter various gifts, but it was impossible at that moment. Abigail took special care of Naomi on that day, although it wasn't much. It was the most she could do for her. However, while changing Naomi's clothes, Abigail noticed something strange in her belly. It seemed swollen. She immediately called the doctor on duty. That day, the doctor said it could be fluid accumulation, gases, or something similar, but he would do an examination to find out. During the medical examination, Abigail and the doctor were shocked to discover that Naomi was pregnant. The doctor immediately called the police and informed them of the discovery. Several police vehicles arrived at the scene and an investigation began due to the commotion caused. Soon, Naomi's pregnancy became news everywhere. The doctors believed it was impossible for her to be pregnant with her deceased boyfriend, as she had suffered a serious accident, underwent surgery, and was still in a coma. The cameras in the vicinity were checked, but nothing strange happened near her room. Naomi's mother was deeply confused, wondering how her daughter could be pregnant in such a state. She did not like to think that worse things could have happened to her. However, despite the doctors finding it impossible for the child to be her boyfriend's, they conducted a DNA test. They compared samples of the mother's DNA with stored samples of the deceased father's DNA and the amniotic fluid to determine the father of the child even during pregnancy. 2 weeks later, the result came out. The child was indeed from her deceased boyfriend. This pregnancy was considered a miracle by everyone, but due to Naomi's condition, her pregnancy could pose a risk to her life. However, Naomi's mother was against doing anything to the baby, as she believed the child was not at fault. The child received even more special care from all the hospital staff. Gradually, her belly grew, and Abigail wondered what the future would be like for this child, being born to an unconscious mother whose father had recently passed away. Abigail sometimes looked at Naomi and wondered what she would think of all of this. Her face seemed serene, but to Abigail's surprise, Naomi opened her eyes at that moment and looked into empty space for a few seconds before closing them again. The doctors checked on the young woman, but she didn't show any other reaction that day. However, the next day, her mother cried out for help. Naomi was awake. She tried to speak, but couldn't. She was very weak from being unconscious for so long. It was a miracle that all of this was happening. The doctors advised against mentioning her boyfriend or father for now, but the pregnancy couldn't be hidden. Naomi looked at her belly and cried, but she still couldn't speak. Her mother comforted her and reassured her that everything would be okay. Naomi gradually regained her ability to move and speak slowly while still recovering. Her mother told her that her boyfriend couldn't be there at the moment and that her father was away on business. It didn't seem strange to her, but she was still a little confused and accepted the fact. However, her growing belly revealed that she had been unconscious for some time. She began to suspect that something was wrong with her father or her boyfriend not showing up, and this made her nervous. So they had to tell her the truth. Naomi broke down in tears when she found out that her father had passed away. However, she showed little reaction when she learned that her boyfriend hadn't survived the accident. The pain she felt from losing her father was unbearable, but even though she was sad, she asked what had happened to her boyfriend. They had argued and she had broken up with him, but he wouldn't accept it. In the car, they kept arguing, and due to the confusion and alcohol, her boyfriend crashed the car. Abigail heard everything from outside the room. Naomi's crying made her cry too. She wished she could do something to ease the young woman's pain, but she couldn't do anything. That night, Abigail had a conversation with Naomi. It was a special moment for her, as she felt like a friend, even though it was the first time they were talking. It was a good conversation, but the sadness in Naomi's face was evident. She said she wanted to get out of there soon, but the baby was about to be born. However, she didn't want to keep the baby. She told Abigail that she hated what was inside of her, and that if she had woken up earlier, she would have forcefully taken it out herself. Abigail was shocked, but she tried to understand the pain that Naomi was going through. A few weeks later, the baby was born. Naomi didn't want to hold the baby, nor did she want to know if it was a boy or a girl. Abigail watched it all, but she couldn't blame the young woman, as she could be suffering from post-traumatic stress or postpartum stress. A lot had happened to Naomi. Finally, Naomi was discharged from the hospital with her baby, but she decided to put the baby up for adoption, as the father didn't want to see the baby ever again. 20 years passed. Naomi was now a mature woman, married with 2 young children. She was successful in life and tried to forget the past. Her husband knew what had happened to her years ago and did everything to make her happy. She had been in therapy for years. Her mother passed away a few years after she woke up, which made her even sadder at the time. However, she wanted to move on for the sake of her husband and children. But occasionally, the weight of the past would come back in her memories, and no matter how much therapy she had, the past wouldn't let her go. She tried to forget the child she gave up for adoption, but sometimes she caught herself thinking about how he or she was doing. However, in the same instant that she thought about the child, she felt a mix of sadness and anger, and remembered the day of the accident. Due to this, she tried to forget the past and focus on the present. Naomi owned a flower shop. Cultivating roses and plants was her hobby, which eventually turned into her main job. She felt more calm when she was surrounded by the beauty of nature, as it brought her peace. She loved receiving couples who wanted to make romantic surprises and bought beautiful bouquets of roses. There was a couple that started frequenting her shop and spent a lot of time admiring the flowers. When she looked at them, she remembered her younger days with her late boyfriend. The young woman picked up a cactus and said she would take it, even though she didn't find it interesting because few people buy cacti. But the young woman said she admired cacti because they are one of the most resilient plants and a symbol of strength, although the only sad thing is that they have to develop thorns to protect themselves from being touched. The man was impressed by the young woman's wisdom. She gave him the cactus, and the couple left. Days later, the couple was back at the shop. Naomi greeted them, and the young man said they would take a rose because someone dear to them had passed away. Naomi noticed the sadness in both of them, but the young man seemed more shaken. So she gave them one of the most beautiful roses she had, without charging anything. They were both surprised and thanked her profusely. That couple reminded her a lot of her past, and combined with the pain of losing someone close, it made her remember even more. Days passed, and she still felt haunted by the past, although it was fading in her mind. She thought a lot about it and made a decision. She would try to find the child she had given up and see if they were doing well, hoping that would help her finally forget everything that had happened. Naomi talked to her husband and explained everything to her young children in a more subtle way, as they were not old enough to understand everything that had happened to her. Her husband supported her decision, and she began to search for her past. Naomi started at the orphanage where her child was left, and she was nervous. But she knew she wouldn't find any other child there, as 20 years had passed. However, shortly after entering the orphanage, she heard someone calling her name from home. It was Abigail. Naomi was confused because she didn't remember her. Naomi then explained everything that had happened while she was in a coma. Abigail listened attentively, but talking about the past still made Naomi anxious. She asked Abigail what she was doing there. Abigail was sincere and said that Naomi's case had affected her deeply because she was there, witnessing every moment from the accident's arrival until the moment she left and gave up the child. Abigail used to visit the orphanage occasionally to check on how the child was doing. During these visits, she had contact with the other children and, knowing what it's like to live in an orphanage, she grew attached to all of them. She started visiting the orphanage more frequently, and then an opportunity arose to work in the infirmary there. She didn't think twice and applied for it. From that day on, she said she found her purpose in life and loved all those children. That's why she continued to work there. She didn't ask about your child because she wanted to see her, as she felt that something was missing in her life, and an unexplained burden always weighed on her conscience. Abigail looked at her for a moment and said, "I stood by your child's side from the moment she entered until the time she left. Your baby was never adopted and left when she turned 18. I still have contact with your child, but I need to warn you that you're trying to contact her, and for that reason, I can't tell you anything else about her whereabouts." Naomi didn't understand and gave her the address of her flower shop as she left. She noticed some cacti at the entrance, placed higher to prevent children from reaching them, with the symbol of her flower shop on them. She asked Abigail why there was a cactus there. Abigail said she liked cacti because they are a symbol of strength, but the only sad thing is that they had to grow thorns to adapt to difficulties, preventing others from touching them. However, she kept them high so they wouldn't hurt children. At that moment, Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She asked who brought the cactus, and Abigail said it was one of the girls who lived in the orphanage. Naomi left crying without saying anything to Abigail. Finally, she found out that her baby was that girl who always came with a boy from her florist, as she spoke the same words about cacti and had also lived in the orphanage. She felt a mix of emotions she didn't know how to express. She barely slept that night. The next day, while at the florist, the same girl from that day came into the shop. Naomi was emotional and apologized to the young girl right away, but the girl said it wasn't her. Naomi was surprised and listened to the girl. She introduced herself as Marta and explained that she was born in the orphanage but was adopted at the age of 14. However, she had always kept in touch with Abigail. Marta explained to Naomi that Dominic, Naomi's son, had sought her help because he knew what had happened and thought his mother didn't want him. So, he asked for Marta's help and pretended to be a couple so he could go to the florist and see his mother without raising suspicions. But recently, one of his childhood friends had died, and it had deeply affected him. Abigail contacted Dominic, but he was too sad and still believed that his mother wouldn't want to see him. That's why Marta went to Naomi on his behalf, so he could at least try to talk to her. Marta and Naomi immediately went to Dominic's home, which was a humble place, but Naomi could see the various roses at the entrance that he had bought from her. She rang the doorbell, and Dominic opened the door. Upon seeing her, he accidentally said the word mother and immediately hugged her. They both cried with emotion. Mother and son talked for hours. She apologized for leaving him in the orphanage, but Dominic said it wasn't her fault and that he knew she must have gone through something terrible, and she did her best for him at that time. Dominic also told her that Abigail had always treated him well and protected him. She was always there for him, and this made him happy to know that someone took care of his son when she couldn't. Dominic met Naomi's husband and siblings and became a part of her life. Naomi knew that the past might not be erased, but she began to love her son. She wished she could go back in time and change her decision, but time doesn't turn back.